Well, like Mariana said, I'm Corey Eddington. I'm from Blomquist Hale, the Employee Assistance Program. You guys look like a familiar crowd. It's the same crew that comes to these usually, which is good with me because we can build some rapport and have some fun. You might remember me from previous presentations on sexual harassment and suicide prevention and lots of fun, lighthearted topics, aren't we? So today we're talking about depression, where it comes from, how to take care of it, those kind of things. How many of you, by raise of hands, are familiar with someone, whether that's yourself or someone else, who has experienced depression? Okay. Anyone also met people who are not depressed? Me? Yeah, you bet. We live in a world that's kind of interesting, and we're going to talk about this very, very much in depth, that the word depressed, I'm depressed, or we're experiencing depression, is used pretty freely, but it may not necessarily always be used accurately. Depression is fairly widespread, for sure. But we think we often confuse it with other things as well. So our job today, hopefully by the end of today, you feel empowered to improve your own health, as well as maybe some things that you might be able to do to improve the health of loved ones as well. Okay, and again, I'm very open to discussion. I'm not a professor, lecturer. I'm used to group therapy and individual therapy stuff, so comments and I'm happy to follow directions that you guys are interested in. So I got to remember. Look at the board here. Depression is a serious medical condition. Have you ever thought of it that way before? That it's an actual medical condition? What makes it a medical condition as opposed to a state of mind? Any ideas?
Chemicals, maybe?
Okay, definitely. Chemicals are involved. Exactly right. Like it says here, it affects all different aspects of our physical body, whether it's eating, sleeping, the way that we think. It's biochemical. It's also environmental. A pretty daunting disease, if you think of it that way. It can influence and affect almost every part of us. So where does it come from? If you guys were to teach us on the causes of depression, what would you say are the causes?
Ongoing stress.
Okay, stress, excellent. What was that? Nothing. Okay. Okay, genetics, good. What else? Anything else? Environment, excellent. So we have this disease that affects all aspects of us and can be created or caused by everything. Oh, good heavens, who's depressed now? Okay, you're right. There is a genetic component. It seems as though in some families especially, you can follow it through generations. Biochemistry, it can just be some sort of chemical imbalance in the brain, right? Anyone know what some of those chemical names would be? Excellent. Serotonin, yep. I always say it wrong, but it's neuroepinephrine. There are like 1,000 of them. You could just say hormones, chemicals. You'll get it right. Yeah. But there are lots of different reasons. We'll talk about medications a little bit, but one of the common antidepressive medications is a SSRI, serotonin-specific reuptake inhibitor. So it actually improves the serotonin in your brain as a result. And there's a few others as well. Environmental factors, especially continuous exposure to things like violence, neglect, abuse, poverty, stress. We're talking about here, right? Personality. Ever thought of someone having low self-esteem as being a personality type issue? Yeah, the way we see the world can affect our mood experience. If we're a little more hardy, maybe we deal with stress a little bit better. If we're not, maybe we deal with it less. We all have different makeups and different structures personality-wise, and that those can definitely affect our susceptibility to depression. Other external events. How many have ever experienced any of those before? Well, I'm getting you all depressed still. We're doing good. We're doing good. Major life changes. Anyone ever experienced a life change? Birth of a child, moving, buying or selling a house. Those are pretty nice things, pretty happy things, or can be, but they can also be very, very stressful. The change themselves is very difficult to adjust to sometimes. How might the use of alcohol, drugs, and medications be a cause for depression? Any thoughts? What was that? Side effects, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, so you've got the chemical response of the medication or the substance. Alcohol is a depressant. If you drink too much, it can shut down your heart, your brain. It slows things down. And there's kind of a rebound effect with alcohol as well, where you have an increase of depression. You know, a lot of people drink to escape, but there's usually this kind of rebound effect that happens afterwards. Certain medications definitely have side effects. You've probably seen those commercials where they very quickly list all the side effects. And, you know, you're taking this medication for depression, and it says that one of the side effects might be depression, suicidal thoughts. Pretty exciting, isn't it? Here's a quote from a police officer that we've worked with. He says, "I can remember it started with a loss of interest in basically everything that I liked doing. I just didn't feel like doing anything. I just felt like giving up. Sometimes I didn't even want to get out of bed." Yeah. That's a pretty heavy statement, isn't it? It's like, I kind of imagine just a heavy, you know those x-ray blankets? Those big lead blankets? I kind of have this, kind of mental image of him just like laying in his bed with this big heavy blanket over him, and he's just incapacitated. Yeah. So we're going to do a little screening. This is the patient health questionnaire. It's a screening questionnaire for depression. So there's going to be multiple questions, and we want to be thinking about the past 2 weeks of your life. Okay? So how often have you been bothered by any of the following problems? Don't answer out loud, of course. Little interest or pleasure in doing things. So it's a scale here from not at all to several days in the past 2 weeks. Feeling down, depressed, or hopeless. Trouble falling or staying asleep, or sleeping too much. Feeling tired or having a little energy. Just kind of keep a running total in your head. Poor appetite or overeating. Feeling bad about yourself, or that you are a failure or have let yourself or your family down. Oh, sorry. Trouble concentrating on things such as reading the newspaper or watching television. Moving or speaking so slowly that other people could have noticed. Or the opposite. being fidgety or restless, that you have been moving around a lot more than usual. Thoughts that you would be better off dead or of hurting yourself in some way. So if you checked off any of these problems, we also need to look at how difficult these specific problems made it for you to function. Work, home, getting along with other people. So you may have answered on that scale of that you experienced some of these things, but now kind of take all of those in perspective and think, how did it affect my ability at work, at home, with relationships? Okay? And as you can see that some of those questions, for instance, they said they're fairly inclusive. Not sleeping or sleeping too much. What else did you notice about the questions in that screening inventory? Any curious questions you maybe not thought of before? And that's just a screening inventory. That's just a few questions. That's not an in-depth assessment like the Beck Depression Inventory or some of those, which are only 30 questions, 32, but they give us an idea. So it's not about whether or not you have those symptoms only, because all of us at some point in our life could answer yes to all of those symptoms. Anyone disagree? So that doesn't necessarily mean that we're clinically depressed, but maybe there is a kind of a, this graded scale of human experience that is human emotion. Sometimes we're good, or sometimes we're not. So depression is similar. There's a continuum. We may have some of the symptoms, but we're not clinically depressed. It's not interfering with our ability to function. Or maybe it is. Maybe it is on this severe side of things like the police officer mentioned, and you can't get out of bed. You can't go to work. That's pretty heavy. So if you answered high on those questions, well, we can do something about that. Okay? I should also say, in my first abnormal psychology class, one of the first things our professor mentioned, she said, we're going to be going through all of the clinical disorders. We're going to read through the epidemiology. We're going to go through all the symptoms. She said, don't diagnose yourself, because you're going to see yourself in a lot of these places. Reading through schizophrenia, you're going to notice you might have some of those things. She said, it's okay, because all of these things in some form are human experience. That doesn't mean you have a disorder. So if you have some questions about that, don't go home and say, okay, Corey said I'm depressed today. But if you have some concerns about that, come see us, and we can talk you through that. And we can, one, improve your life, help you improve your life, regardless of whether you're clinically depressed or not. But we could help you along that path. So let's talk specifically about the symptoms of depression. What would you say would be on this list? The things that people notice or say that they're depressed.
Things to say or things
That they feel, that they experience, things they might complain about. Lack of interest. Yeah, good. Okay, mood swings. What was that?
Negative.
Yes, very negative.
not eating.
Yep, appetite. So you saw it on that one that it's either way. Yeah. Sleeping too much or not enough. Very good. Very good. Let's see if we... And now for clinical depression, and we'll talk about the different types of depression as well, but to be diagnosed with depression as a disorder, these symptoms need to persist for 2 weeks or more. So if it's just happening today and then Friday and then we're okay, that's not depression. Okay? So sadness, anxiety, irritability, loss of interest or pleasure in things. And not just everything, but specifically those things that I like to do. Because I might be stressed out and overwhelmed and therefore distracted. And that may not necessarily be that I'm depressed. But if I lose interest in those things that I really like to do over a period of a couple weeks, that might be a symptom. Worthlessness, hopelessness, or guilt. Anyone ever experienced those before? Guilt, yeah. The one that's really particularly dangerous for suicide is the feeling of hopelessness. Because a lot of people can deal with stress, feeling overwhelmed, feeling guilt. But when we lose hope, when we feel like there's no other path, that's when suicide becomes really scary. Thoughts of suicide. Changing in sleeping appetites, sleeping habits or appetites. You might have a sleeping appetite, I don't know. I wake up hungry all the time. Trouble concentrating, remembering things, making decisions. Feel like I'm in a fog, easily distracted. Physical complaints, aches and pains, stomach problems, headaches. Feeling like slowed down, or the opposite, being kind of agitated. Of course, suicidal thoughts or actions. Anyone surprised by the stuff on this list? It's kind of inclusive, again, if you think about it. How many of you have, you don't have to raise your hand, but how many of you have experienced some of those before? Again, this is very, very evident in our lives. This is part of human experience. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're clinically depressed. There's another quote. This one's from a fireman. I wouldn't feel rested at all. I'd always feel tired. I could get from an hour's sleep to 8 hours of sleep, and I would always feel tired. So how might this particular one sometimes be confused when maybe it's not depression, but it's something else? Ever thought of other medical conditions or physical conditions that might lead to you feeling tired even if you've slept all night? Anxiety? You bet. Sleep apnea. Excellent one. Yeah, well, it's not excellent. Good example. Yeah. The opposite of excellent. Yeah. Congratulations. Yeah. The thyroid problems. Your thyroid is in control of a few hormones that can affect your mood very severely. Any other, you hear the stories of people that are diagnosed with cancer. And they say, oh, I've just been fatigued for months. I go to the doctor, I'm just so tired. So you can see that these things kind of overlap, can be easily confused. And so hopefully part of a diagnosis of depression will also include some sort of physical exam with your medical doctor to rule out some of these other things. You imagine you come in for treatment, we're talking about improving your mood, and we're not having any success. So now I start to feel bad that I can't do it, that I'm somehow, broken. And then I come to find out that, it's a thyroid issue, and I actually need to have a medication that has nothing to do with how I'm thinking about the world. Maybe we've created some depression, So hopefully, if you get any treatment for depression or anxiety or some of these others, that there's also a physical exam that goes along with it. All right, let's talk specifically about the different types of depression. So this is the one that most people are thinking about when they think about depression. It's called major depression. So it has a combination of all of those symptoms that we talk about, of course, interfering with our ability to function in some way. And they usually come in episodes, so at least 2 weeks. So typical diagnosis of depression, major depression will say major depression, single episode, recurrent episode, and some other combinations like that. So the major depression is an intense, kind of short-term episode of depressive experience. Now, it might recur over and over again, But these are kind of short-term, high-intensity experiences. The opposite of that is something called dysthymia. So this is kind of a low-grade experience of depression over a period of years. It may not be interfering with our ability to function the same way, but it's eventually it does, if that makes sense. That we kind of just kind of peter out. We lose all of this motivation, and this one is often misdiagnosed as fatigue or some of those other I'm just stressed out. But dysthymia is the lower grade over a longer period of time. Let's see. You can have them mixed in together. You might kind of be in a dysthymic kind of place for a long time with these kind of peaks of major depression in there as well. Pretty exciting, right? Yeah. Anyone ever heard that word before, dysthymia? Okay. So far most people are thinking about depression as just the one thing, right? And maybe sometimes people think of depression as this one. But there are these two different types. And then there's this one, a bipolar disorder or manic depressive disorder. That's what we used to call it a long time ago. So and this one's a little bit different. It's still a mood disorder, and it still includes depression, but there's also a cycling of mood to something that is very opposite of depression, something called mania. As severe highs. Sometimes it's even seen as like you're high on meth. You can even get into these kind of psychotic episodes where you're not sleeping for weeks. Spending sprees, sexual promiscuity. That's a tough word to say. Just the sky's the limit. People typically like to be manic. So treatment is pretty tough for bipolar disorder sometimes. Because in the depressed side, it's like, yeah, I need some help. I'm suicidal. Life's not what I want it to be. So they get put on some medication, things start getting better. And then they phase into this other place, and now it's like, oh, I'm good. I'm untouchable. There's this grandiosity, I'm the best. I'm gonna rule the world. So it's pretty hard to treat bipolar disorder. And which is unfortunate because bipolar disorder is typically a long-term treatment. A bipolar disorder might be triggered by some of the things that we talked about in terms of the causes of depression. But typically, bipolar disorder is more of a chemical problem, genetic chemical problem. And so just like something like diabetes or some other Crohn's disease or some of these things that are more chronic because of the chemicals. Which also means that a bipolar disorder can be treated fairly successfully with medication management if you can keep them on the medication. Yeah. Sometimes bipolar disorder is misunderstood. A lot of people will say, I think that person's bipolar, when there's this kind of like immediate up and down mood experience. That may be possible, that may be it, but typically the shifting between cycles of a bipolar disorder are a little more gradual, and there's some more time between them. So you might be in a depressive state for a couple of weeks or months. You might be in a manic phase for a couple of weeks or months, and it's not. Depression, anxiety, sleep deprivation, hunger can cause those irritability, mood fluctuations, insecurity. Those things can all. But we use these terms, depressed and bipolar, fairly loosely sometimes that way. Any questions about major depression, dysthymia, and bipolar disorder? Is this fairly common information? You guys have heard some of these things before? Yeah. which is good because 10, 20 years ago, this was a lot more stigmatized and a lot less education. Oh, we forgot about this one, SAD, which is an awesome acronym. Seasonal Affective Disorder. Have you ever met someone that has seasonal affective disorder? The weather changes and the mood drops. Anyone know one of the recommended treatment for seasonal affective disorder is? Yeah, the lights. You sit in front of a bank of lights. Yeah, go to St. George. Yeah, move. Yeah, don't live in northern Utah. Yeah. Yep. Another interesting cause of depression that was in some research, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago now, at the University of Utah, is elevation, living at elevation. And we do. We live at, 4,000 or 5,000 feet. And there's some, I can't remember the technical term, there's some genetic adaptation that needs to happen for a human to live at elevation. And if that doesn't happen, you might experience something like symptoms of depression. Whether that's, not being able to metabolize oxygen and some of those things, brain function diminishes as a result. So if you live in Utah, you might be depressed. That's all, right? And Utah has a pretty high rate of depression. One of the highest in the nation, especially in terms of prescribed medication for depression. So here's the question then. So what is the difference then, as we've kind of talked through these things, between depression, which is a clinical term, and just feeling blue, human sadness, low energy? What do you think? What's the difference? Time? Definitely, time is a huge factor. What else? Yes. It interferes with their ability to function in some form. Yep. Sometimes, like I said, it's fairly trendy these days for someone to say, I'm depressed. Well, there's a lot going into that word. From a clinical perspective, I don't believe the word depression is an emotion. It's a clinical description of a series of experiences, physical, emotional, mental, and ultimately it's a word that's been created so that we can bill insurance companies on the treatment that we do. So we have to be careful with that word. Yeah. Depression is not a sign of personal weakness or something that can just be willed away. You maybe have experienced some of that in your personal lives where someone with depression is kind of vilified. They're doing it on purpose. They just need to pull up their bootstraps and buck up. Or, a lot of times this happens in religions, is they need to pray more, go to church more, repent of their sins, right? Well, definitely, if you have a guilty conscience, that can affect your mood. But if it's this kind of chemical, genetic part of depression, well, you got to be careful with that because now we're just going to add more guilt and shame on top of something that's already pretty heavy. So we can't just wish it away. I was at a conference last week, and they were talking about addiction, drugs and alcohol. The keynote speaker was this soon-to-be lawyer who had been in federal prison for drug use and overcome his addiction, and happy story. But he talked about that he was often told by clergy members that he just needed to pray more to get rid of his addiction. Not saying that that's not going to help, but he's going to need a little bit more. He's going to need a little work on him for himself too. Again, can't always just why do you think we go there? Why do you think we go there with people and believe that they're just choosing this in some form, that they just need to snap out of it? Why do you think we go there as human beings or about other people? Because we don't usually do that. Well, sometimes we do it about ourselves, but it's usually we don't understand it. Yeah, we definitely don't understand it because we're not in that place, and it doesn't seem that big of a deal sometimes. Yeah. Like somehow they've gotten themselves in this place. Yeah. Another reason I think we go there is because we don't understand it, we try to help somebody, and it doesn't work. They're still depressed. Everything we do doesn't change that they're depressed, so we feel helpless. I don't like to feel helpless. I don't think human beings like to feel helpless. So where do we go when we feel helpless? We cover that with blame. Yep, we cover that with blame, anger, and frustration because it gives us a sense of control. If that person would just change, if they would just do this, they would feel better, right? Or, we use those kind of vilifying words. We're basically saying, this can change. And I'm in charge of it because if I just get loud enough or say the right words, they'll get it. So we get this kind of false sense of control, which just makes things worse, not better. So it's really hard, especially in support of a loved one, to kind of stay in this helpless place and be truly supportive of someone. Work from their perspective. Yeah. So without treatment, symptoms for depression can last for a long time. And we'll talk about some of that. Here's a quote from a sergeant in the Air Force. I drink and I just get numb. I mean, we're talking many, many beers to get to the state where you could shut your head off. But then you wake up the next day and it's still there. Because you have to deal with it, it doesn't just go away. It isn't a 2-hour movie and then the end, it goes the end and you press off. I mean, it's a 24-hour-a-day movie and you're thinking there is no end. It's horrible. Whew. I'm depressed again. Very common experience in human life, depression is. It doesn't matter age, gender, cultural status, how much money you have. I've worked with some very wealthy and some very destitute people with very similar symptoms. 10% of all Americans will experience major depression at some point in their life, and some researchers even push that up towards 25%. So major depression, again, is those episodes of high-intensity depression. Women are more likely to be diagnosed with depression. It doesn't mean that only women experience depression. Why do you think men are not as likely to be diagnosed with depression?
Man in my house doesn't go to the doctor.
We're taught that we can do it on our own. Right? Yeah. Another common issue, I think, is that it's often not recognized as depression. So in my experience, that it's more likely for men to present as irritable as opposed to sad. And so they might come to treatment for anger problems. And the underlying issue is depression. Yeah. Leading cause of disability in the United States. So the filling out of those FMLA and request for depression, or request for disability, short-term and long-term. Depressions is part of the most causes of those. There's a lawyer. When I was feeling depressed, I was very reckless with my life. Didn't care about how I drove. I didn't care about walking across the street carefully. Didn't care about dangerous parts of the city. I wouldn't be affected by any kinds of warnings on travel or places to go. I didn't care. I didn't care whether I lived or died, and so I was going to do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. And when you take those kinds of chances, you have a greater likelihood of dying. So his depression was reckless. Almost, maybe you see some of these adrenaline junkies. Maybe that what's really going on, there's some depression there. All right, let's talk about treatment. A publisher over here said your tendency is just to wait it out. Let it get better. You don't want to go to the doctor. You don't want to admit how bad you're really feeling. But, that's a common thought, but typically depression is treatable. Very treatable. And early treatment can definitely mitigate the intensity of the experience. Somewhere between 80 and 90% of people respond well to treatment. And almost all patients gain some symptom relief. So you look at, the genetic chronic kind of depression, the expectation may be, I don't want to be depressed, but there might need to be some expectation, just like something like diabetes or something like that, it might be around for a little while. And so it's more about symptom management sometimes, as opposed to resolution of the problem. People with depression often delay treatment a long time, sometimes nearly a decade from the onset of their first contact with it. So it's a very treatable disorder, but people suffer for a decade before they get some help. Holy smokes, right? So thank heavens that we're a lot more educated and there's a lot more push for getting help for these kind of things and some access to services as a result. Yeah. Let's see. So there's two typical types of treatment for depression. We've got therapy and medication. So psychotherapy or talk therapy can be very helpful by itself. May not need any other treatment. Especially with mild depression, psychotherapy may be all that you need. Sometimes it's individually based. It can include the family. It can include a couple or, siblings or coworkers. Can include a lot of different people. And significant improvement can be made in just a few sessions. Why do you think talk therapy works with a medical condition? Any thoughts?
The person actually realizes what's going on and they say it.
Yeah. Sometimes just saying something and talking about it creates this experience where we gain some control over it. What happens in our head is not rational, logical information. It's not even in language. It's chemical impulses, memories. So just the act of talking or writing forces us to process that information into English and put some organization to it. And it can give us some clues on things we can do to improve. Or sometimes people just have a cathartic experience. Just by talking about it, it's like it leaves. Talking can help in a lot of ways. Sometimes we need some specific direction. Someone to tell us, this is what you should do. So getting outside of ourselves and processing the information can make a difference. Because sometimes it is, I need to set some boundaries with my friends, or I need to improve my relationship with someone. And having a third party that's not in the system with you can give you some good insights. All right. Medication. Antidepressants, often prescribed. It's a chemical approach. Problem with medications is they often take some time. The problem with alcohol and other substances is that they work immediately. They're not a long-term solution because, as we mentioned from that police officer talked about drinking, we wake up the next day and the problems are still there. But antidepressants usually don't take full effect for a month to 2 months afterwards, which also means that a lot of times people don't notice the benefit of the medication. They think, oh, it's not working, nothing's happening, so I'm going to stop taking it. And then some of them are like, oh, I guess the medication was helping once they stop taking it. And others, they don't give it a shot. But that's the problem with medication treatment, is that sometimes it does take some trial and error. The doctor's trying to find a chemical that somehow matches your biochemicals, and then you have to mitigate and manage some of the side effects of medications. So if there's little improvement or no improvement after 6 or 8 weeks, we probably need to keep talking to the doctor. And it's recommended you continue on a medication even after you sense your symptoms have improved. Why do you think that is? Why should we keep taking a medication even though, one, they're working, right? So we get lulled into this sense like, oh, I fixed my life. But it's the medication that's actually working. The chemicals are working. So I need to keep those chemicals stable in my body. Any other thoughts? Is it possible once you start an antidepressant that someday you don't necessarily need an antidepressant again? You bet. But we need to take our time with it. Abrupt changes don't bode well for depressive experience. So the research shows that the best practice for the treatment of depression is a combination of talk therapy and medication. Why I think that this is important is we all kind of experience, we all have a threshold emotionally. And once I get to a certain level of emotional experience, I'm flooded. Therefore, the animal part of my brain's in charge. I'm not very rational. I'm not thinking clearly. So the medication helps to get us outside of that flooded place. And then the talk therapy part is a restructuring. It's like retraining the way that you think. If you're irrational and flooded emotionally, you can't really do the cognitive work of changing the way that you look at the world and talk to yourself. So the combination of the two is what has the greatest effect according to the research. All right. Here's some more positive. We're getting into the more positive side of things. A national diving champion. So you start to have these little thoughts. Wait, maybe I can get through this. Maybe these things that are happening to me aren't so bad. And you start thinking to yourself, maybe I can deal with things for now. And it's just little tiny thoughts until you realize that it's gone. And then you go, I don't feel sad anymore. And then when it's finally gone, when I felt happy, I was back to the usual things I was doing in my life. You get so happy because you think to yourself, I never thought it would leave. So you can see how something like a little bit of hope can be so powerful in the treatment of depression. If I believe that this is just an episode as opposed to my entire life, that can improve the difference in my motivation and my ability to do something as opposed to accepting my fate. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit. So according to, I always pronounce her name, Sonia Lyubomirsky. She wrote a book called Pursuing Happiness, The Architecture of Sustainable Change. And she comes up with this chart that the things that make the biggest difference in terms of chronic happiness, that's kind of a weird term. We usually use the word chronic with something that's bad. But chronic happiness, she says that 50% of it's genetic, our chemical makeup. 10% is circumstance. And then there's this big chunk, 40% intentional activities. I don't know, what do you guys think? Agree, disagree? Yeah. So, as we mentioned before, if I'm experiencing symptoms of depression, and maybe I have some chronic depression, maybe I'm not going to be able to get rid of the depression. But maybe I can do things that can make it better. Just like with diabetes, if I manage my weight, my symptoms improve a lot. Okay. And now I'm going to challenge you a little bit, because I think the treatment of depression, I think what we're looking for is often misconstrued. So what do you think the opposite of depression really is? Trick question. What do you think people would normally say to that question? Happiness, right? So I disagree with that for a couple reasons. Depression is not an emotion. It is a psychological state of being over a period of time. Happiness is an emotion. Human emotion is very transient. It doesn't stick around by itself in any one form usually, unless we purposely are perpetuating it. So to say that I'm going to have an expectation that I'm going to be constantly happy is a dangerous expectation. Would you agree? So the opposite then of depression, and maybe something that we're looking for in the resolution of symptoms, is not happiness, but I would say it's passion. So depression says, ugh, I don't feel like it. That zest for life just like, ugh, is gone. I'm not getting out of bed. Passion is not necessarily an emotion. It can be a state of being where I'm excited about what's going on. I'm interested in life again. It may not be easy, it may not be fun, but passion, I think, is the opposite. So I don't like to use the word happiness, but I agree with the chart in terms of intentional activity can make a big difference. But we also have to be sensitive to what's going on and not over-expect changing things we can't change. So let's talk about some treatment for depression. So looking and finding passion in life, purpose. If you've never read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, I would recommend that. He was a psychiatrist, but before he was a psychiatrist, he was in a concentration camp. And he talks about some of his observations of the difference between people that survived the concentration camps and not, of course, there was a lot of murder inflicted on people. He's not talking about the people that survived that way, but the people that experienced the same terrible experiences. And he said some of them survived and some of them just kind of gave up. And he talked about the difference between them, and the one group had meaning, had purpose, even in their suffering. Okay? So seeking out those things, finding those things, can make a difference in your depression. What are some of the things you guys are passionate about? You ever thought about this before? Anyone want to share? Things you're passionate about? It does fluctuate. It doesn't have to be steady all the time. Yeah, running, hiking, getting out in the mountains, you bet. So you're having a down day, right? Well, I'm going to purposely engage the things I'm passionate about. It may hurt. Running hurts me. But there's a benefit to it. Good. What are some other things you guys are passionate about? Photography. Excellent. And what? And your chickens. Excellent. Yeah. Yep. Sometimes. Women are very good at saying their first response is, yeah. Yep. That's a very, very typical response. Moms are going to say that the top of their passion list are their kids and grandkids. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but there is some danger in it, because what if my kids or grandkids are not doing well? And my mental health is based in their success.
No, it's a joke and broad. Sometimes family will give you depression.
Very much so. Very much so. Yep. Very much so. Family can be a great cause of conflict and overall depression.
They might be going through something that you can't do anything about.
Yeah. You bet. You bet. We can't control. We try very hard as human beings to control things that we can't. And typically, those things that we can't control are other people. But we try real hard, and we're often disappointed and frustrated as a result. So definitely finding purpose and passion in your life, even if you're not happy all the time, can make a difference. And this kind of fits along that line. Depression says, I don't feel like it. It's like this voice is whispering in your ear, oh, you don't have enough energy for that. It's not going to be worth it. But how many of you have had that experience where you've had that thought, then you went and did it anyway, and you're like, oh, this was cool. This was an awesome experience. So sometimes we have to spite depression. Almost imagine it as this monster that's, whispering in my ear, and purposely say, you know what, screw you. I'm doing this because it's good for me. That's intentional activity. That's intentional activity. Eat right. How might diet affect and improve your mental health? Anyone had any experience with that? I sleep better when I eat. Better? Yeah. Yeah. If I feel like my clothes fit, I feel better about myself.
They say mental and physical are very related,
Mm-hmm.
Exercise is the best antidepressant, and so if you're eating right, then your body is healthy enough.
Yeah. I agree totally that our minds and bodies are very well connected. And if we take care of our physical body, our mental and emotional body tend to follow, or vice versa. Yeah, good. And of course, certain foods, if you're eating a pure sugar diet, you're going to have those crashes, energy crashes. If you're eating a healthier, kind of balanced diet, that there's more of that steady energy state. Yeah. Sleeping. So not everyone who has sleep problems is depressed, but nearly all people who are clinically depressed report some form of sleep problem. So it's chicken or the egg. If I can get some sleep, that really makes a difference. So maybe my medication approach for depression is not an antidepressant. Maybe I need to get some sleep, or maybe I need to manage my stress, change my job so that I can get a better schedule. Yeah. Exercise, you brought this one up. Exercise is a fantastic treatment for depression, anxiety. It's something we talk about in all forms. One, it gives you a task, some sort of goal orientation. But there's two parts to it. One, there's an energy consumption that is very useful. You maybe have heard someone say, if you're angry, go punch a pillow. Well, I would recommend an exercise that's not necessarily angry, but the exercise itself is a great place to put that energy, and it's almost cathartic. Like I'm putting it in that place, and I don't have to carry it around with me anymore. What else all helps with exercise? Well, I get a shot of endorphins as I exercise or after I exercise. It's hard to, you sleep better as well when you exercise. Mindfulness is the next part of this. Anyone ever heard that term before, mindfulness? So it's typically kind of a meditative process, but in its roots can be very practical. And I think there's two parts to mindfulness that really make the difference. One is we start to have this ability to focus our energy and our mind on what's actually happening now. Anxiety is typically about the future, the things that might happen or could happen or should happen. And our imaginations are very good at thinking about all of the possible worst case scenarios, right? Depression is typically about the past, things that have happened. And they're talking to each other sometimes, depression and anxiety. But if we were to take a percentage of your life where those things are actually happening, what percentage of that would it actually be? Some bad things are going to happen, but maybe like 5%. The majority of our time is spent at work or asleep. And for the most part, especially when I'm asleep, most people enjoy that experience. But if I can get myself to this current place, I tend to have a better experience. My mind doesn't know the difference between what is going to be or what was. Whatever's inside my head, it thinks is happening right now. So if I'm imagining all these bad situations, if I'm living my entire life every 5 minutes, I'm going to be anxious. But if I can check into, oh, I'm sitting on this chair talking to Corey. He's kind of boring. He's making me depressed. But life is, I'm okay here. It's quiet here, Yeah. You can see. The other part of mindfulness is that it also perpetuates this more observational approach to our experiences, less judgmental. So instead of it being, I shouldn't feel this way, it's like, I feel this way. Let's look at that. What's really going on? And maybe we have a little better experience. That takes some practice, all these things. Exercise, mindfulness, they're not easy fixes. They're things that take repetition over time. Music is an excellent source of mood management. You might create your own soundtrack. What are some songs that might be on your soundtrack that might just lift your spirits to get you going? There's a lot of songs out there like U2's Beautiful Day, right? You listen to that, it's hard not to kind of just lighten your mood a little bit. There's thousands of songs. So maybe one of your intentional activities, maybe you create this soundtrack for positive mood, and maybe you need to listen to it on purpose because I'm having a bad day. Music is also a mindful activity. The only way we can actually get ourselves to this place is to pay attention to that information of our five senses. Because our five senses is the only information we have that tells us about what's actually happening right now. So focusing on one or two of our five senses can be helpful that way. Write or journal. Lots of different forms of this. Some people will write about the day's events. Some people will kind of do that, kind of angry, stressed writing where they'll scribble it on a piece of paper and then they'll throw it away. There's some research done in Texas a few years ago that had two groups of people, and they had one group specifically writing about, what's happening, what they're going to do about it, a more prescribed kind of journaling. And they had another group just kind of free writing, just writing about whatever is going on. Both of them had a mood improvement as a result. So writing can be very, very helpful in all its forms. I might also suggest, I don't think I put it on this list, just like exercise, having hobbies or activities, but instead of, if I have angry or depressed energy, if I do something creative, that energy is usually very positive. So creativity in terms of writing or exercise or things like that can really be encouraging. Looking for the good, listing the good, so not just putting it in your head, writing it down, it makes it more real. You may have heard people talk about, look for the good in others, gratitude lists. Those things really do make a difference. But again, there needs to be some practice with that. And you have to believe what you're doing. Affirmations. I always think of, when I hear that word, I always think of the Saturday Night Live skit with Stuart Smalley, I think is his name. You're good enough. You're smart enough. By golly, people like me. Right? So if nothing else, you do an affirmation, it might make you giggle, right? But maybe you can change the way that you think and talk about yourself. What else? Anything else that you'd put on that list?
I think we had a good exercise last month on like a gratitude journal.
Yeah.
Not just the things you're thankful for, but the interactions you have with people each and every day.
Yeah.
You realize that if you don't have that,
Yeah.
you can miss out on that. And then also complimenting people.
I like it.
You know that.
Yeah. So for those that are watching on the video, she's talking about gratitude and compliments being very powerful. And not just the things you're thankful for, but you can go so in depth with gratitude, to the point of, that I'm appreciating the air that I'm breathing. You can always find something to be grateful for. And I like the compliments because typically to get something, if I want some positive energy in return, if I give it, it's going to come back. So I can't just expect someone to show me gratitude, but if I give it, it's likely to come back to me in some form. And that's intentional activity. I may not feel like it. I may not want to do it. I may not have it in my heart and soul, but I can get there. And that's very intentional work. There's a marriage researcher by the name of John Gottman, and in one of his books, he's written 3 or 4, he writes about how gratitude is the antidote for all poisons in a relationship. It's impossible to really feel gratitude and to feel resentment at the same time. So gratitude has a lot of power. Good. What else? Anything else? I guess we're out of time. So the sky's the limit. Intentional activity can make a difference. Definitely research shows that talk therapy and medication management are the best, but you may not need both of those things. Come and see us. We'll talk you through it. We'll help you understand it. And hopefully all of us can not be so depressed, right? We can leave here passionate about what we're doing today, Yeah. Okay, well, thank you guys for your participation, and hope you have a good day.